Namaste. Welcome. Welcome back to a journey through the Tarot de Marseille majors. This is a personal exploration of the Tarot de Marseille, something that I have committed to over 2024. I have primarily been working with Golden Dawn based decks and decided that this year I wanted to take some time to really reconnect with Tarot de Marseille and similar decks. So it's my pleasure to guide these discussions weekly, and I really appreciate your input and feedback. So thank you. If you're new to my channel, my name is Sadhana, and welcome. Hello to Laura and Arya. Namaste. Today is all about the Hermit. And this is a card I particularly love reflecting on. There is something I deeply connect with here. And those of you that have been following me can probably figure out why that is. So let's explore this card. And I will let you know the names of the decks, though I've been using them for a while, except there's one different one on the table today, and I'll tell you all the titles, and be sure to come back later on and put them in the description box below. Really interesting conversation about the hump on the Hermit's back. I work in healing arts and reflect on the energy that is carried in and on people's backs and on people's bodies in general. And for the Hermit to have such a large back, and to have various writers write about this, I think is really, really interesting. In the theory of yoga, welcome Dee. Nice to have you here. Nice to see you too. In the theory of yoga, we store our past on the back. And when the back is really congested and tight, and sometimes we don't feel anything, sometimes it can create a lot of pain. Sometimes there might be a lot of back fat, or the back begins to create a shape like you see in the Hermit. It's suggestive of carrying our past and not having processed it. So this would be in contrast with someone who stood up a little more upright and didn't have excessive baggage, quite literally, on their back. And it's a really interesting thing to work with and begin to bring awareness to teach querents to learn to breathe into their back body, so that we're not just breathing in the front part of the chest, but actually learn to breathe and move the rib cage in the back. And I love that a few of the cartomancers, tarologists, in writing about the Hermit, actually addressed that. I think it's really kind of interesting. Hi Saskia, welcome. I had another really random thought, and that has to do with the Roman numerals. And I know the system of Roman numerals has evolved over the years, but I was looking at the 5 and the 4, 5 plus 4. I was thinking, okay, does this card equal Emperor and Hierophant? And in a way, it's a really interesting question. The Emperor faces the same direction as the Hermit. The Hierophant generally goes the other direction. The Hermit, I know, has been described as moving away from responsibilities, conformity. The Hermit moves away from justice. And I just find it kind of interesting that the Hermit might be a 5 plus a 4. So I don't know where or what I might make of that. But I haven't had this deck out for a while. This is the Tarot of the Ozarks by Laurie LePage. It almost looks in this deck like the cloak is a chair. And when I was looking at this, I thought, yeah, there is the Emperor standing up and leaving on his way. And I know that's not really kind of built into the history of this card, but I just found it kind of fascinating. That is a large cloak. You know, you could imagine any number of things underneath that robe besides a large body. Yeah. So where to begin? A direction is really interesting. The notion of lefts and rights. And as always with direction, more importantly than what is past and what is future, I want to pay attention to what the Hermit is moving towards, or perhaps more importantly, what the Hermit is moving away from. My dad's side of the family, says Laura, has a very pronounced back bow. It is, and when there is a pattern in a family, like a physical feature in a family, this is so interesting if you have time and energy to look back at family karma and where this began. Don't have time really to get into this today, but it fascinates me how these patterns repeat. And I have been exploring my own sacral chakra surgery this summer through generations and generations of my family and the lessons and the patterns that have come forth through that. And it's just a brilliant inquiry if you can ever get people to open up and share and explore the history. We can learn so much. The Hermit carries a light, and so we need to talk about the light. And I had this other thought, and maybe this came through the bit where J.M. David was talking about Diogenes. The Hermit card doesn't appear to be in darkness, except for one card. It appears they appear to be in the light. And so regardless of the time of day, they hold up the light. And I think there's something worth exploring there. And in some of the Hermit cards, this little lamp is really little. I mean, look here at the tiny little flame in this card. It's not a very big lamp. Does it have to be big? What is it illuminating? Or is it simply symbolic of something? And why would the Hermit hold up the lamp in the daytime? All of these are just brilliant questions. Another conversation that is worth exploring has to do with the historical connection, or I don't know if you would call it historical, but the fact that a lot of the saints and the Gautama Buddha left privileged families to explore greater meaning in life. And that definitely is a common theme. The idea that the Hermit chooses simplicity. That we don't need there's so many things here that just, I was about to say we don't need to carry much. We don't need to have much. We need to release our possessions, lighten our load in order to find our way on a spiritual path. And yet the hermit carries so much on his back. In most hermit cards, he is seen in daylight, making his lamp unneeded. Always reminds me of Diogenes, except Diogenes was described as naked much of the time. And he is heavily, heavily cloaked. I don't have, the Buddha Tarot is right there. It's not really in reach. I'm just thinking about the many sadhus whose path I have crossed in India, among other places, but that part of the world, and how they wear very little, if anything. And so the fact that this card is heavily cloaked is very culturally significant. Might have something to do with the weather and the climate where these cards were created. And yet I try to embrace an energy and an archetype. And I think the fabric, the heavy clothing, is symbolic rather than literal. Sorry, I'm jumping all over the place. But what's coming to mind now is cloistered nuns, the protection of the walls of an ashram, various spiritual protection and seclusion that one may choose. The fabric, the cloak, creates that. Oh, yes, I should have had that card out. Yes, it's a beautiful card. And oh my goodness, I can't believe I don't have it on the table. Oops. If you do have, yes, that is I love the hair, and I believe there's dreadlocks. I want to tell you a story of a man, a spiritual leader I met in West Bengal, very far into the countryside. He was tall. Oh my goodness, he was tall. He stood straight, and he had and a lot of sadhus like him, wear their dreadlocks wrapped around and around and around and around in a bun on the top of their head. Well, we had the privilege of sharing a meal in this temple, ashram, and at some point during the night, he released his dreadlocks. And those dreadlocks they were like a train on a wedding gown. They went down his back, down the floor behind him. It was really quite something. Yeah, but I digress. Diogenes the cynic held up his lamp in daylight. He explained, "I am looking for man." I want to examine this. You're funny. You're funny, Arya. I don't think so. I really want to examine this, holding up the light in the daylight. And I don't think this is something I've ever explored before. And I think there's something really juicy here in holding up the lamp in the daylight, because we assume in the daylight everything is seen, but it's not. I think about politics and certain circles where it looks like everything is on the up and up. But we need to remember to always be discriminating and to be looking for what are some of the words that are used in these, like authenticity. Authenticity. I mean, that's not a word that was used in the older books, but yeah, looking for integrity, an honest man. This, interestingly, is one card that hasn't really changed. Generally speaking, there is an old man moving to the left, holding a lantern in the right hand and a stick in the other. And I was reminded this week in reading that that stick, of course, was not always used for as a walking stick, but also used for protection, right, from animals, scorpions, who knows what. Yeah, so what do you want to do with this card? And how are you going to read it when it arises? Okay. And I have some contemporary cards on the table too. I hopefully will have time to look at. In the Fine dalla Torre, this one is just so very interesting. The wings and the purse and two walking sticks, and there is no lantern. And this to me feels like, definitely feels like an older person, yet the skin, the face looks quite young. And there definitely is movement. Movement away from a pillar. Movement away from a temple. Movement away from something. And if we're going to read this as movement to the past, let's change that vocabulary and say movement or reflection of one's history, one's inner world, right? It's a revisiting of who we are, and we're holding up the light, really, aren't we, to examine our own integrity. And I'm really intrigued with these wings. I think it takes tremendous, and maybe that's why it's an old man. I think it takes tremendous strength to embark on this kind of journey. And you really need to give up a lot to do this. It's not an easy thing to do. And I don't think this is something that you can do once a week on the psychiatrist's or the therapist's couch. There's a reason this is a solo card. And that can be horrifying for querents who, I know a lot of people, people think, whoa, the devil card or the tower card, but no, this card can really put bring anxiety forth in when certain questions arise. Because aren't we asking ourselves to wander into our past, to wander within to hold up the light, not just to our darkness, but to what we claim as our light. We're holding up the light to everything. And that is not something very many people do. If we look at the colors in these cards, can we get some information from that? So primarily we're looking at the outer cloak is blue. Or green. And there are touches of red, right? So there's an inner red sleeve, there's a red hood, except for the soprafino, and little bits of gold and green. So if we look at this layer by layer, I think, it's not rocket science to see that this is presenting as a man is a pretty integrated person. I have been doing inner work for a while. Let's just say that. And I remember sitting with various teachers and thinking how difficult they, from time to time, have made my life when teachers say things to support my journey. It feels like they're provoking me, or they're poking me, or they're pushing me a little further than I would ever push myself on my own. And where I'll get to your last comment in a second, Arya. Where I'm going with this is that if you turn to the word guru and the external guru versus the internal guru, that external guru can be really, really tough on you, seeing what you cannot see. And also having the experience and the wisdom to guide you on your path. And I think going back through the ages and various spiritual experiences that people had, this was often a one-on-one, right, with a advisor of some sort or another. And so the light that is being held up can be extremely uncomfortable. Okay, let's go to the last two comments here. The way the lamp is held, you can be blinded by your own perspective. How true is that? David says the Hermit is the first person in the trumps. Yes, I remember reading that. There are a lot of correspondences. So if I go back, like Vedic astrology, this old concept of the sadhu and the hermit, this would be associated with the wisdom of Jupiter. And I know that this also has a Saturnian connection. And isn't that interesting that one culture would focus on Jupiter and one on Saturn? Because we know the relationship between Saturn and Jupiter. The greatness of Jupiter, it's like it almost wants to unleash our potential. And maybe that also describes the sheer size of the figure in this card. I mean, look how much actual space the Hermit takes up on the card. I mean, this is the Jean-Pierre Payen, 1713. The Hermit quite literally fills up the whole card. Not just, it's not just a part of the card. And that is the case in most of these cards. And yes, callings can be a very hard road to travel. And they are, yeah. So when this card arises, you know that expression, when the student is ready, the teacher will present, or the teacher will appear? And I was also having something to say about there may be a relationship here with the Hierophant, and yet the Hermit is more commonly compared to the High Priestess than the Hierophant. And I think you could possibly build in connections in a reading depending on what is presenting in the other cards. So I want to look for directions. I want to look for connections with these other highly significant teachers and guides and channelers of spirit and wisdom. Okay, now what about the Fool? What about the Fool? I forgot what David said about the Fool and this card, but it's hard not to compare this card to the Fool. They are going in opposite directions. The Fool kind of blindly, madly goes forward, whereas the Hermit very consciously, mindfully steps backward, steps into the past. And if you compare, right, look at Dee's comment about the size. His sheer size is double that of a Fool, the space that it takes up on the card. And this feels very important because I know that changes in contemporary decks. I have a few of them here. I love that Waite and Smith brought in this correspondence of the Mountain and the Fool in this card. That really resonates. But what I don't like is all of the space around the Hermit, because then we lose this conversation of the largesse, of the Jupiter qualities, or even Saturn, of this grand archetype, this grand persona. And this, of course, is metaphorical because this great teacher, this great guide, could be possibly, right, physically a much smaller person, but they hold all of this space and they carry all of this. Now, there's so many things here. What about also Shaktipat and the fact that this type of being also, okay, so that the largesse and the weight on the back is not just their stuff, but also they have the ability to take on your karma as well. And I know this may not follow in certain Western philosophy, spirituality, but the idea here is that the great guru on your behalf can take on your karma, and because of their level of spiritual enlightenment, they are able to process it, eat it on your behalf, but they do carry it. And I believe I shared with you a conversation I had with one of my teachers, Ananda Shakti, about coming into the presence of Amma, the hugging saint. And we were talking about her size and all that she carries. She's got a very soft, large body. And it was so eloquently put, but when people come in her presence, there is quite literally a shudder. And the release, I mean, I have been in her presence and sitting very close to her, observing the hugs of various people. And it's tremendous, the energy that she is able to process on others' behalf and what she's able to release for them. And so what I understand is that she would be taking on energy, like be constantly in the process of moving through other people's energy, but always taking on so much. All right. Yes. And experience, right? Golden Dawn decks see Hermit as Virgo, not Saturn or Jupiter, but ruled by Mercury. Yes. Yes. And yet, you know, and I just spent a last class talking about Mercury and the Hermit. Well, we didn't really talk about the Hermit, talking about Virgo cards. I think there is space. I know there is space to integrate the energy of how the cards were with how the esoteric traditions have changed the cards. And this is one of my joys and one of the reasons why I continue to, and I mean, all of us, right? Study and explore and read and contemplate all of this. And I don't know if I have you ever seen a hermit card where the walking stick is a snake? Have you seen that? I feel like I have, but I'm not so sure. And that would indicate a power of this particular being. Hello, Sandra. Yes. Yes, there is so much under that cloak, and I think that's what I was trying to express when I was in the presence of Amma. If you don't know Amma, she's referred to as the hugging saint. She's from southern part of India, travels the world, and you just know that inside those layers of clothing there is so much, and there is so much that is held on behalf of humanity. Sorry for the background noise. Okay, I want to name the decks that I have here on the table. And then if you want to prompt the discussion, I have time to go into a little bit more. And then I want to share with you a couple of the contemporary decks I have here. So this is Fine dalla Torre. This little one is Noble, Renault's what's the word? Redoing of that deck. This is Dodal. And this is Pierre Madani, 1709. And there's just something about these three here. They're very, very similar. This one is Jean-Pierre Payen. And I am going to do a side-by-side of this deck with the Ben Gros Tarot of Rousseau. That's going to come up soon. This is the Soprafino. And then the Gassman Tarot. And what's really interesting here is that little tiny light. And I think we have bare feet. That's another thing to look for. We don't often see the feet. And as you're aware, there may be little sandals on. Many of these types wore bare feet or very rough sandals. This is This is Tarot de Marseille, Pablo Robleda, which is not based on any one deck. This one here is Jodorowsky, Chem 1. And I mentioned already, this is Tarot of the Ozarks, with this possible reference to the throne of the emperor. Yeah. Okay. So as I mentioned, this is a really, I think, important difference between contemporary decks and the Marseille, is the space that the emperor takes up. And I guess the fact that we went from a desert somehow to the top of a mountain. So that's very, very different. I have two of Anna Turian's decks here. This one is her creation. So this is the Tarot of Echoes. And there's something kind of profound here. The Hermit's not so old, but I appreciate that glimpse inward. The robe stays blue. It's kind of a cool card. And we should talk about the number 9 too. And this is the Arthurian Tarot, also Anna Turian's art, but Claire Duval's creation. And I think what's really interesting in this card is that she turned the Hermit to go in the direction of the Fool, and that the dog became a wolf. So I think a lot of work could be done with this card. In reflecting with the Fool. Number nine as what? With the 9s in the tarot, I think that the largesse of this card really reflects the fullness, the penultimate grandness of the 9s. And that when this card arises in a reading, it's highly significant, and equally, oh my goodness, terrifying for some people. And then, the conversation will go in lots of different directions, with conversations of 3, 6, 9, triple threes, triple triumvirates, and the divine implications here with the number 9. I really do like this card showing up in a reading, except when a querent goes, "Oh, you mean I'm not going to be with my lover?" Time for an inward journey, honey. Yeah. My biggest takeaway from the reading, the more recent reading, is this idea of holding up the light in the daytime. And I'm thinking of a very practical interpretation of that. So let me know. Let me know what your greatest feeling is with a Marseille Hermit versus a more contemporary card. And of all of the symbols in this card, which is the one that guides you most clearly? Does this card come up for you very often? So thank you. Thank you all for contributing to this conversation. I hope that there will be many more chime in the comments, and please continue to return to the comments. I think the continued links and sharing and insight has been really invaluable, and I appreciate you all so very much. Have a lovely rest of your day. Take good care. Namaste.